Catherine will speak on my behalf. Mrs. Meghan Markle has repeatedly written to the palace seeking our intervention in the Epstein matter, but, like Andrew, she must face her own consequences.
The decision did not arrive through a public proclamation or a carefully rehearsed palace speech. It came behind locked doors, at the end of a meeting so tense that even the most experienced royal advisors struggled to remain composed. By the time the final vote was counted, Prince Harry had not merely lost another privilege. The Palace Council had voted to remove him completely from the line of succession. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. Charles knew everyone around the table understood what was coming. Advisors, royal representatives, and crown officials had gathered at Buckingham Palace to decide whether Harry could remain inside the monarchy's future beyond its control. The Palace Council, a private body assembled to advise the sovereign on crown matters, faced a personal choice. William sat several chairs from his father, silent, unwilling to meet the king's eyes. The clerk called each name. No one spoke beyond the required answer. When the recorded vote ended, the resolution passed. Harry and his descendants would be removed from the British line of succession, the legal order determining who may inherit the throne. The decision was permanent and framed as protection for the crown's stability. It did not merely push the Duke from royal duty. It cut his branch away from the monarchy's future. Charles showed no relief. The tally reached him, and he removed his glasses before placing them beside the papers. His eyes settled on his son's name. The monarch had approved institutional defense, yet the father inside him understood the price. Harry was still his child, but the crown had demanded a boundary affection could no longer soften. William felt a different wound. The prince did not challenge the result, but his fingers tightened around the table as the clerk confirmed its finality. His younger brother was no longer merely absent. He had been formally separated from the dynasty William would one day lead, and that separation now extended to Harry's children. A sealed red folder rested near the council chair. The resolution had been prepared before anyone entered, proving someone within the palace had decided reconciliation had failed. A second document remained withheld. Only Charles, William, and the chair had read it, and its contents explained why the vote had suddenly accelerated. The doors opened, but William stayed behind. Charles looked toward him and asked, "Does your brother know what forced us to do this?" The council had delivered its judgment, but behind it stood a father, two sons, and a betrayal that transformed a family rupture into a constitutional reckoning. For the public, the succession could be reduced to names, numbers, and constitutional order. For King Charles, it was the story of two sons who had once walked behind him as boys and now stood on opposite sides of the monarchy's deepest fracture. William carried the future on his shoulders. Harry carried years of anger and rejection. Between them stood a father who could no longer protect both his child and his crown. Charles left the council chamber without speaking. Removal from the succession, the official order deciding who may inherit the throne, meant far more than losing another ceremony or palace privilege. Harry would no longer hold a constitutional place in the monarchy's future, and the last formal connection linking his children to the hereditary order would disappear with him. The king understood that the resolution had not simply changed a list, it had cut an entire branch away from the crown. The monarch entered his private study and instructed the aides outside not to disturb him. He opened a drawer and found an old photograph of William and Harry laughing together as children, long before duty and resentment divided them. Charles held it in both hands, searching their faces as though the past might explain how the family had reached this point. Then he turned the photograph face down. He could not reconcile those two boys with the vote he had just permitted. William carried his own grief into a private conversation with Catherine. As heir, the person first in line to inherit the throne, he had spent years preparing to protect an institution increasingly threatened by personal conflict. His duty now extended beyond his own future. George, Charlotte, and Louis would inherit the consequences of every decision made before their time, and Harry's uncertain position had become a risk the prince could no longer ignore. Catherine listened as William admitted that supporting the resolution felt like closing a door on his brother forever. She noticed that he never called Harry by his title. He kept saying, "My brother," as though the words could preserve something the council had just taken away. The future king defended the decision, but she could hear the pain beneath every careful sentence. Camilla found Charles later and asked why he had refused the chance to delay the vote. The queen consort expected hesitation from the father, even if the monarch understood the necessity. He answered that time had already been given again and again, yet every delay had deepened the damage instead of healing it. Harry still knew nothing. A palace secretary prepared the secure notice, but paused because Charles had not attached his personal message. Then William told Catherine the truth. The crisis had not begun with interviews, departure, or memoirs. It had begun with a confidential succession briefing that was never supposed to leave Windsor, and to understand why patience collapsed, the story had to return to that room. The decisive rupture began not before cameras, but inside a small Windsor conference room, where Harry had been offered something the palace had denied him for years: private access, direct answers, and one final chance to rebuild trust. There were no cheering crowds and no hostile interviewers. Only Charles, William, Harry, and a confidential succession document that would become the most dangerous paper in the room. Charles arranged the meeting before a major royal anniversary, hoping to stop years of hostility from poisoning another public occasion. He invited his younger son without advisors or media representatives, and promised a direct conversation about security, family access, and his long-term relationship with the monarchy. The king wanted honesty. Harry wanted proof that the family still saw him as more than a problem to be managed. William attended reluctantly, because the discussion involved contingency planning, the emergency arrangements used if a monarch becomes unable to perform royal duties. A confidential briefing document rested between them, outlining which family members would assume temporary responsibilities if Charles could no longer serve. The prince understood why the paper mattered. It protected continuity. Yet Harry saw something colder hidden inside its careful language. Harry pushed his chair backwards after reading the section that gave William greater control over future decisions. He accused his brother of using duty as a weapon to erase him from the family. The future king remained seated, but his restraint carried its own anger. He told Harry that distance had been his choice, not a punishment created by the palace. Charles tried to pull both sons back from the edge. He asked them to speak as brothers rather than opposing camps, but the request came too late. Harry demanded a promise that Archie and Lilibet would never be treated as outsiders. The monarch hesitated. He loved his grandchildren, yet he could not offer constitutional influence an official role in how the crown functions without the royal responsibility that gives such influence meaning. The real betrayal arrived 48 hours later. Exact phrases from the Windsor briefing appeared in a private legal memorandum sent by Harry's representatives to the palace. Only 4 people had been present. The paper had never been copied, emailed, or released through official channels. William immediately concluded that protected information had left the room through his brother. Charles resisted that judgment, desperate to believe another explanation existed. A security review ended that hope. No aide or staff member had accessed the document after the meeting. Trust had not merely weakened, it had been breached at the highest level. Charles made one final attempt to contain the damage. He summoned Harry back to Windsor and ordered every aide to remain outside. The confidential briefing had ignited the crisis, but the coming confrontation between father and son would convince the king that the fracture could no longer remain private. Charles did not summon a prince that evening. He summoned his son. No courtiers stood behind the king, no lawyers waited beside Harry, and no prepared statements softened what had to be said. On the table between them lay the confidential briefing and the legal memorandum that repeated its protected language. The door closed. Then Charles looked directly at Harry and demanded the one thing the monarchy had stopped expecting from him: unqualified truth. Harry entered the private Windsor sitting room, expecting another argument about security and his treatment by the palace. Instead, he found the succession briefing beside the memorandum submitted by his representatives. The legal memorandum, a written document used to present arguments or demands, contained phrases known only to those who had attended the earlier meeting. Charles had dismissed every aide because he wanted no witnesses and no excuses between them. The king placed one hand on the documents and explained that the words could only have come from someone inside that room. Harry could criticize the monarchy, challenge its decisions, or reject its traditions, but he could not take confidential constitutional material, protected information about how the crown would function during a crisis, and carry it into an outside legal dispute. Harry stood abruptly. He insisted that he had never released or copied the physical briefing. Charles rose more slowly, and told him that repeating its contents had caused the same damage. His son's voice hardened. He argued that his advisors needed to understand how completely the palace intended to exclude him and his children from the family's future. Charles refused that accusation. The earlier meeting, he said, had been offered as an act of trust, not a trap designed to erase Harry. His son answered that trust could not exist when the palace controlled the information, the rules, and the consequences. Silence followed. The king reached toward the briefing but did not reopen it. He closed the folder with a sharp snap. Harry finally admitted that he had shared portions of the private conversation. He said fear had driven him, the fear that the palace was already preparing to remove him before he had even heard of a council resolution. The admission changed everything. The protected details had left Windsor through him, even if he continued to call the act self-defense rather than betrayal. Charles offered one final path back. Harry had to sign a written assurance that future family discussions would remain confidential and suspend any legal use of internal royal communications. His son refused. To him, the condition sounded like permanent silence and complete surrender. Harry walked toward the door. Charles warned that his refusal would force the crown to protect itself. His son paused but never turned around. Moments later, the king instructed the council chair to activate the sealed succession review, leaving royal blood to be weighed against broken trust, and placing terrifying power in the hands of those preparing the final vote. The vote appeared to belong to the palace council, but no decision of this magnitude is created by a show of hands alone. Behind the formal resolution stood carefully tested loyalties, constitutional calculations, and the silent approval of those who believed the monarchy could not survive another breach from within. Yet the most powerful figure in the process was not the loudest. It was the man who had spent days trying to avoid the decision entirely. Charles understood that personal anger could never justify removing his son from the succession. The Palace Council's resolution, the monarchy's official recommendation for constitutional action, had to prove that Harry's hereditary position now conflicted with his chosen separation from royal duty. Without that argument, the decision would look like revenge. With it, the palace could present the removal as protection for the crown's future. William's support carried even greater weight. The prince would inherit the reign shaped by this vote, and his children would live with its consequences. Without the heir's approval, Charles might appear to be an aging father punishing an estranged son. With the future king standing behind the resolution, it became a judgment about the stability of the next generation. William sat alone with the draft before the meeting. He read the clause naming Harry and his descendants, then stopped at a sentence describing permanent disloyalty. The wording felt cruel, not constitutional. He crossed it out. The prince would accept his brother's removal, but he refused to let the document become a public humiliation designed to wound him forever. Anne confronted Charles before the final session. She warned that delay could weaken the crown, but unnecessary cruelty would stain it just as deeply. The king admitted that history might remember him as the father who cast out his own son. His sister did not offer comfort. She told him history would judge why he acted, not simply that he acted, and Charles carried those words back into the chamber. Several counselors proposed a compromise. Harry would be removed, but Archie and Lilibet would remain in the succession. William rejected it. The future king argued that preserving their position would pass the same unresolved conflict to two children whose parents could not support the royal responsibilities attached to it. Catherine quietly shaped what came next. She told William that protecting George, Charlotte, and Louis required clarity, but clarity must never become revenge. Her counsel helped produce language that removed Harry's branch without denying the family's personal dignity. The resolution passed, and palace staff moved immediately. Access lists, ceremonial protocols, official records, and future planning documents began changing before Harry received the notice. Then one altered page made the council's hidden power brutally real. His name vanished from the future the crown had once promised him. Harry learned the truth thousands of miles from the room where his fate had been decided. There was no family member beside him when the secure message arrived, only a silent telephone, an official attachment, and language so final that he read the first paragraph 3 times. Then he reached the revised succession page. His name was gone. So were the names of his children. For several seconds, he did not move at all. Harry received 2 communications. The first was the council's formal notice, written in controlled constitutional language and confirming that his branch would no longer remain within the hereditary order. The second was a private letter from Charles, Succession briefings. Confidential discussions about who may inherit the throne and assume emergency duties would no longer include him, and neither would regency planning, the arrangements used when a sovereign cannot temporarily perform royal responsibilities. The consequences reached further. Harry would lose access to restricted crown correspondence and ceremonial records tied to the future monarchy. He remained the king's son, and Archie and Lilibet remained his grandchildren, but affection no longer carried official standing. The family bond survived in private. Their constitutional place did not. A glass struck the desk as Meghan entered. Harry stood over the printed notice with both hands pressed against the table, his anger trapped beneath a frightening stillness. She asked what had happened, but he could not answer immediately. He pointed toward the empty space where their names had once appeared, and finally whispered, "They have erased the children with me." Meghan felt the shock turn into fury. She urged him to respond before the palace controlled the entire story, but Harry hesitated. The confrontation at Windsor returned to him with brutal force. He wondered whether refusing Charles's final condition had allowed the monarchy to say he had chosen this ending. Shame entered where anger had been. He folded his father's letter carefully and placed it away from the official notice, unable to destroy either one. The voting record deepened the wound. Harry discovered that the resolution had passed by a decisive margin, not through a narrow and uncertain split. The palace had not stumbled into his removal. It had reached a collective judgment that his family could no longer remain inside the succession. One absence consumed him. William's individual position was classified, meaning it had been kept from the released record. Harry became convinced that his brother had driven the vote, unaware that the prince had removed its harshest language and fought to preserve his dignity. Meghan began preparing a public statement, but a direct message interrupted her. William wanted a private call. No lawyers, no aides, no spouses. Harry stared at the request, then accepted, knowing the next conversation could leave them as permanent enemies or force them to speak as brothers at last. There were no uniforms, no council papers, and no courtiers listening when William's face appeared on Harry's screen. For the first time in years, neither brother began with an accusation prepared by someone else. Harry wanted to know whether William had voted to remove him. The future king could have hidden behind procedure. Instead, he answered plainly, and the truth was more painful and more compassionate than Harry had expected. William spoke from a private room at Windsor after asking Catherine to leave him completely alone. Harry had made the same demand of Meghan, telling her to delay every public statement until the conversation ended. No advisor could interrupt them. No palace official could reshape their words. The resolution, the formal decision approved by the council, had already changed the succession, but this call would decide whether anything personal remained between the brothers. The prince admitted that he had supported the final vote. He explained that the succession could not become a symbolic insurance policy for someone who rejected royal responsibility while using confidential information in outside disputes. Harry listened without moving. He had expected denial, careful language, perhaps another excuse. William gave him none. Harry finally asked the question beneath all the others. "Did you want me gone?" William paused. His answer came quietly. "I wanted you back." That is not the same thing as pretending nothing happened. Harry looked away. The words denied him the comfort of innocence and the simplicity of blaming pure hatred. His brother had not voted from indifference. The future king had acted because he believed the damage could no longer be hidden beneath family loyalty. William then admitted that he had removed language branding Harry permanently disloyal. He had supported constitutional separation, not public disgrace. The prince insisted that the decision was meant to protect the monarchy rather than destroy his brother's dignity. Harry's restraint finally cracked. He replied that dignity meant little when Archie and Lilibet had lost something attached to them from birth before they were old enough to understand it. William accepted the pain but revealed the factor that decided his vote. The Windsor briefing contained emergency planning involving George. Once information concerning the young heir entered an external legal strategy, he believed his first duty was to protect his son. Silence followed. Then Harry admitted that sharing the briefing had been a mistake. He did not apologize for defending his family, but he acknowledged crossing a boundary by using information entrusted to him as a brother. The call ended without reconciliation, yet it prevented open retaliation. Harry agreed not to attack William personally, while the palace removed language of disgrace from its announcement. The brothers could not reverse the vote, but their honesty changed its meaning, from an act of vengeance into a painful declaration that the crown had chosen certainty over blood. By sunrise, the decision that had been guarded behind palace walls belonged to the world. Broadcasters abandoned scheduled programming, newspapers rebuilt their front pages, and crowds gathered outside royal gates, searching for a glimpse of movement behind the windows. Some saw necessary protection of the crown. Others saw a family using constitutional power against one of its own. Yet one single image came to define the day more powerfully than every argument. Buckingham Palace released its formal statement before the morning bulletins ended. The announcement confirmed that the council had approved Harry's complete removal from the line of succession, and that constitutional recognition, the legal steps needed to make the decision part of the nation's royal order, would now follow. The palace spoke of continuity, responsibility, and the protection of future generations. Every word sounded controlled. The consequences were anything but. Harry answered with a shorter statement. He acknowledged the decision without accepting that it was fair, and he declared that his commitment to Archie and Lilibet remained unchanged. He did not attack Charles or William. That restraint reflected the private agreement reached with his brother, but it also revealed how little space remained for open anger, without causing another family explosion. Charles watched the first television bulletin alone. When the revised succession order appeared, the king lowered his gaze, as though the missing names carried more weight than those still listed. Camilla entered and reached toward the remote, but he asked her to leave the coverage running. The monarch believed he had no right to escape the consequences of the decision he had authorized. William faced the judgment outside. He arrived for a scheduled engagement and heard applause mixed with shouted criticism. One voice called Harry's removal cruel. The prince stopped for a second, but Catherine touched his arm and guided him forward. Public support gave him no comfort. He had protected the future crown while losing the last official bond connecting his brother to it. A London newspaper captured the conflict in one brutal front page. 2 childhood photographs of William and Harry appeared beneath the headline, "Brothers Divided by the Crown." By midday, people held copies above the crowd outside Buckingham Palace, turning the boys they had once been into symbols of what the monarchy had broken. Windsor offered no unity either. One group sang the national anthem near the castle gates, while another raised signs defending Harry's children. The council had secured constitutional clarity, but it could not command emotional agreement. Charles listened as the arguments grew louder. Then he sat down to write one final letter to Harry, not as sovereign, but as a father accepting the cost of his own decision. The world had delivered its judgment, yet the final verdict would be written by the family, once nothing remained to reverse. The council's decision did not end with triumph inside the palace, or rage across the ocean. It ended with a father writing to the son he could no longer protect from the consequences of his choices. The monarchy had achieved what it believed was necessary: a clear succession, a secured future, and a boundary that could no longer be crossed. But certainty carried a price, and every member of the family understood who had paid it. Harry and his descendants now stood outside the succession framework, the official structure determining who may inherit the throne. Future royal planning would proceed without his branch, ending the uncertainty that had surrounded his position since he left active duty. The monarchy had gained clarity, but it had done so by formally closing the last constitutional path that might once have led him back. William emerged with greater authority and no sense of victory. The future king had protected the line that George, Charlotte, and Louis would inherit. Yet his first defining act of dynastic guardianship, the duty of protecting the ruling family's future, had permanently excluded his own brother. Power had strengthened his position. Grief had made that strength feel unbearably heavy. Charles finished his second letter without the language of councils, resolutions, or royal command. He told Harry that the crown's decision would stand, but the door to a private relationship between father and son would remain open. The king signed only one word: Papa. He sealed the envelope himself and ordered it delivered without an official cover note, because this message belonged to a father, not a sovereign. Harry read the letter alone. He did not tear it apart or prepare another angry response. Instead, he placed it beside a childhood photograph he had kept away from public view. The prince finally accepted that returning to the succession was impossible, even if some fragile personal bond with Charles might survive beyond the crown. The truth could no longer be softened. Harry had demanded freedom from royal control while retaining the protection of hereditary position. The monarchy decided those two conditions could not exist together. His removal was not one sudden punishment. It was the final consequence of choices that had become impossible to reconcile. William met Charles after the announcement. The king asked whether the crown was safer. His elder son answered that it was clearer, not safer, because no constitutional rule could protect a family from grief. The monarch understood. Institutional stability and personal healing were not the same victory. The Palace Council preserved the monarchy's future, but confirmed the collapse of the family once standing at its center. Harry was not erased as a son, brother, or father. He was removed as a possible king. There would be no reversal, hidden compromise, or return to the old order. The crown moved forward, and the prince who had spent years leaving it finally discovered that it had learned to continue without him. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.